Hello everyone and welcome. I'm going to do a quick review here. Well, it's probably not going to be too quick because I'm going to go into a lot of depth here on the brand new MTH ES44. So the MTH makes two different versions of this engine. They're going to do all the different Norfolk Southern Heritage units, some Union Pacific engines, BNSF, probably altogether close to 40 different road names. Or different paint schemes are going to be coming out for this particular mold, which they introduced with the hybrid Gevo, which actually came out quite some time ago, towards the beginning of the year. So many of them will be coming based on this mold or this tooling. I chose the DCC Ready version, and this is the box that it came in. We're not really going to talk about the box. There's plenty of other videos on YouTube you can watch where they talk about the packaging for 2 minutes. This is not one of them. Also bought the Loksound Select with the Gevo programmed on it. Relatively small decoder. Can't really see, but on the other side here there's a 8-pin harness that just plugs right in. And we'll get into the install of that just a little bit later. But moving on to the locomotive itself, at first glance, this really reminds me of an Intermountain. You would actually have to really look at it, never having saw one to even really notice that this was a different model. And just looking at it, it really does look like an Intermountain. And in previous MTH offerings, the detail hasn't been perfect. If you look at their SD70ACEs, pretty good, but not quite as good as the Athearn Genesis as far as the detail. There were some things that were a bit off proportion. This is pretty dead on, so that either says that Intermountain got it right or MTH really copied them. So who knows which is the actual case, but to me, I think it's about as accurate as you can get. So taking a look over the engine, some details on it. Let's see if I zoom in there. But the paint is really crisp. I mean, there's no points on here where you see glue marks or things that are blurry. I mean, it's pretty dead on. So just to compare it here with the previous reigning champion, so this is an Intermountain and the Pensy here. So as we take a look at these two, just taking a look at what, if any, actual differences there are, because believe me, it's pretty hard to actually tell them apart. So just the MU cables, first of all, these have a little bit more separation in them versus these, which are kind of all close together. Also, the hosing up front here is a little bit different, but there's really not a right or wrong way to do that. They're folded up differently on every locomotive. The ditch lights are about the same size in each. I will say that the MTH ditch lights are far brighter. They're about the brightest ditch lights I've ever seen in a factory locomotive, and we'll see those a little bit later in action. As far as the railings, the MTH, while it does use wire, it is still and can be very fragile. And the little stanchion things here, those are still plastic, so they can break. So you still have to be careful with it. Not quite as careful as what you have to be with an Intermountain. I've had this thing apart probably close to 10 times. So, I definitely would not want to have to take apart one of these again. Because they are very fragile and you have to be super careful while you're taking them apart. But just taking a look again over the differences between these two, other than the MU cables, probably won't show up on camera here, but this has a treaded walkway, this does not. Also, this uses a much longer KD coupler as opposed to this one uses a shorter one. The MTH actually looks a little more accurate being shorter. Not that that's a big deal because you can put any coupler on these that you want to. Looking over the tops of them, virtually identical. So not much of a difference at all. As you look at the sides of them, looking at the side details here, pretty much everything looks identical. Not a whole lot of difference at all. One of the definite differences between these two is the lighting itself. The MTH uses very bright, nice LEDs. I was concerned that it might be just a tad too pure white, kind of like the SD70ACs are, whereas they're so white they almost don't look realistic. They need a little bit of that yellowish tint to them. This definitely has that, and you'll see that a little bit later. It's not quite as yellow as the Intermountain, but it is far, far brighter. Running these two, next to each other, if you're looking at the Intermountain, initially you first think that that's pretty nice and bright. It's nothing compared to this MTH. As far as the drive, it's MTH, to be expected. It's super quiet, very powerful. This may even be one of the most powerful pullers in a diesel locomotive in HO scale that's ever been offered outside of brass. And there's been pull tests done by several other people here on YouTube confirming those figures. And we'll do a little tug-of-war between these two later that I think you'll find pretty hilarious. I elected for the DCC Ready version as opposed to the Protosound 3 version. Not because I wanted to do more work, but because the Protosound 3 version, I feel it's nice that you can buy something with sound in it, but if I'm going to do that, I want it to be accurate. And the Protosound 3 really is not. The prime mover doesn't sound at all like it should. The horn is wrong. Also, with those, not really an advantage or disadvantage, but the couplers are a little bit different. They have the function activated couplers. I happen to like them. A lot of other people don't, but they usually give you KDs in the box, so if you don't like them, you can change them. So, I mean, that's an option. Because of the fact that Protosound 3s run the DCS and then they have some DCC compatibility in them, it's kind of a pain to get them to run with other DCC only engines, and I have a nice mix and match of different manufacturers, different engines all together, and I want that compatibility between them, so I elected to basically get something that would work pretty well with my Intermountains. And going with the ESU, that definitely does that, because it basically sounds the same because that's what Intermountain has in it. As far as the install on these, we're going to get into a video here in just a moment showing what needs to be done. MTH has made a very, very strong effort to make these DCC ready and easy for the installer. However, there are some issues, mainly that of the ditch lights. The ditch lights out of the box are actually wired together, front and rear, which means that whenever you move the locomotive and forward, not only are your front ditch lights active, but the rears are also, because they're wired together. So in order to get them to work independently, you do have to do some cutting and rerouting. So there's a wire that runs to the rear, which basically I had to reroute into the rear headlights so that those work correctly. And then on the fronts, the main issue is that they don't work independently. So on West Coast railroads where the ditch lights don't alternate or oscillate, it's not really an issue because they're always solid. On Norfolk Southern and some of the other East Coast railroads, you want them to kind of go from side to side, off and on, when the horn goes off. So in order to do that, there is some wire rerouting that has to be done, which I'll show you here in the next part. I was really worried that I wouldn't be able to accomplish that, and if I wouldn't have, I probably would have ended up getting rid of the engine, because I didn't want to have an engine where that doesn't function properly. So I was able to get that to work, but we're going to get into the run-by here next, and then also the install as well. Alright, so here's a look inside at how everything came out as far as the wiring. So these just have a standard 8-pin plug, which is pretty easy to do that part there. I'm using a Loksound Select. already pre-programmed for the GEVO. As far as some of the wiring that's needed on these, it's a little bit more than what MTH actually tells you. The little jumpers that are in here, which is for the ditch lights and the number boards there, you can pull those out because you won't actually need those. Over here with the ditch light left and right, I ran the green and purple wires there. Also ran the aux 3 wire, which is the red one here, into the number board port there. Not using aux 4 on this. I actually rewired the rear ditch lights because MTH has them all together from the factory, and all 4 of them basically act as one, which is not what you want. So I'll include some photos at the end of the video here of what I did on the underside of this board here. Basically, I just wired up the rear ditch lights to come along with the rear headlight, so they don't flash on F2, which is basically the same as how they run on Intermountain, so I'm okay with that. For the fronts, in order to get these to flash, it's a little bit different. Simply going and wiring here and here off your decoder does not work, because MTH has them wired together, so it's basically impossible to get them to oscillate or flash just as they do on Norfolk Southern, or for any of the other East Coast railroads that do that. It's not really an issue if you're running, Union Pacific, BNSF, railroads which just basically have solid ditch lights that don't change at all, so you don't really have to do a whole lot. However, for those of us who actually want them to act independently, there is some rewiring required. So to do that, first there's a brown wire which actually leads back here to a plug in which actually houses the rear ditch lights. Basically, you'll want to cut that right about here. And what I did was on this end, I actually wired that into the board here on the other side, and then the part that was loose right around here actually gets wired in up front. So there is some modifications that you do need to make up front here. So there's 2 pads here. One's marked D2L, and the other one I believe is D1L. So from the factory, there's a black wire that runs from here over to the other side. You have to completely get rid of that. The one black wire, which runs into the big harness plug here, you want to keep that. And you'll want to keep that in the same location that it was in. And then on the brown wire, which was formerly running back to the ditch lights here, you'll want to basically cut it right about here and then take this strip here and run it and solder it into the other port right here. And that will actually make them work. So I actually picked up that trick from Bradley DCC. He has some videos here on YouTube. Definitely check him out. He has a lot of install videos up, whole lot of them. So he was kind enough in order to tell me how to do this, because I was kind of starting to freak out a little bit, thinking that I was going to have to actually wire up completely brand new ditch lights. I actually ended up having to pull this whole panel up here, and there's actually kind of this little ribbon piece here, which is almost like a circuit board that has them to where they go over top there. So I had that completely ripped out. I had the wiring here completely off, trying to figure out what on earth I was doing. But fortunately, it was basically changing a couple wires up front here and one in the back, and you can get them to do what they need to do. The lighting in here is very, very bright, but you'll see here on the run-by video in a moment. Also, pretty nice fit for the decoder back here. I just used a little small strip of 2-sided tape. Kind of fits in just perfect there. Also under here is a couple harness plugs. They were previously kind of tucked underneath. I actually had an issue where one of them was starting to basically drag on one of the drive shafts, and it was making this awful noise, so I figured I'd just relocate them up top. Kind of keeps them out of the way. You don't really need to access them, but if I did, I can just pull that piece of tape off and I can get to anything I need to. And then also another thing here too, off of the decoder, the green wire is actually basically soldered onto here. You'll want to cut it right about here, and then you can actually wire that green wire back here, because you don't actually, it won't do anything if you leave it hooked into that. Let's see what else here. The alternate lighting source is also not a jumper that you need to be concerned with, so you just want to remove the ditch light and the number board ones, which are, oh, I don't have them out here, but they're little clips that go into there. Purpose of that is if you didn't have a decoder which basically has enough lighting outputs, you can just have that in there to where they're always on and just runs off of the board power. So that's pretty much it for inside the shell here. Overall, not too bad of a setup. I just wish that MTH would be a little bit more clear in how you're actually supposed to wire these up. Because if it wouldn't been for Bradley DCC, I would not have been able to figure it out, and I probably just would have wired ditch lights straight off the decoder, just ran a wire all the way up to the front and did it that way. Which I suppose you can do. That definitely would work. It's just more work than what you actually need to do. Alright, we're going to do a good old-fashioned tug-of-war here. Champion versus Challenger. In this corner we got the MTH. In this corner we got the Intermountain. Let's fire them up. (8114) speed step 1, 2, 3. It's not moving the Conrail at all. 8098. Alright, so some final thoughts. You've seen it in action, you've saw the insides of it, you've saw what it can do. In my opinion, this is the finest HO scale ES44AC that's been produced to date. Intermountain, I think, was the gold standard. This way, in many ways, it does actually exceed that. Not only the lighting, the detail, I think, is also better than the Intermountain. Pulling power, drive, obviously. They both use the same decoders, so there's not really much of a difference there. The Intermountain does come in a little bit less in cost, probably by about $40 to $50, so that's something to take into consideration as well. If you're trying to go and collect, all 20 of the heritage units, that definitely adds up. So you might want to maybe save this one for if you got a lot of money. I mean, you can buy anything you want, or if you don't, maybe buy the MTH of the ones that you like and get the Intermountains for the ones that, you're just trying to collect to have all of them. Or even Bachmann. Some of the others that have made the ES44AC in the past, Tower 55, which Athearn actually bought their tooling, and Athearn really hasn't done very much with it, to be honest. They've only come out with about 3 different road names, and they've failed to update it, so in time perhaps they'll bother to come out with one of these. Broadway Limited is also going to come out with one of these engines. I don't really know that anyone's going to be able to top this. I mean, the Broadway with Paragon 3 in it will probably exceed the Protosound 3 that's in this. And they'll probably be around a similar cost, but we'll have to wait until next year to see one of those. But at this particular moment in time, I believe this engine might even be one of the finer examples of any diesel in HO. So lastly, I'm also going to leave you with some pro tips here of CVs that I've changed. These will also apply to an Intermountain as well, but just things that I've found that seem to work pretty well on this engine, and through playing around with it, seem to make it a little bit better. So here's that video, and enjoy. Thanks for watching.